welcome to the final episode of the Whitfield Report for 2019 and the final episode of the decade, I guess. Welcome to this very special edition of the program, and I am pre-recording this on Monday, so you guys will be hearing this on New Year's Eve. And yeah, I realize it's not the usual Saturday edition, but I wanted to do one more show at the end of the year, so I want to thank you for joining me. Even though this is technically pre-recorded. Contact info as usual. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at SamW_NDC, hashtag Whitfield Report. You can follow me on Gab and mine's at Sam Whitfield. Facebook.com/Whitfield Report is the Facebook page. TheSamWhitfield.com is my website. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all for joining me here in the past, present, future hour, whenever you're watching and or listening to this, if you're on the audio podcast. And by the way, if you are listening to this on the audio podcast, whether it be Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave the Whitfield Report a 5-star review rating if you like the show, and help us get the numbers up. If not, if you don't like the show, well, you're banned. You're banned. I've got a tomahawk in my hand. Nah, I'm just kidding. If you don't like this show, what can I tell you? But regardless, folks, I want to, take this last episode of 2019 to not only reflect on the year that I've had so far, but also to reflect on the past decade, and not only for this show, but just in kind of politics, and the culture war and podcasting in general too, because there is a lot that has happened, and I want to first off begin by reading something to you from my website, thesamwhitfield.com, and I will of course link this article in the description for you guys on both the audio podcast and on YouTube. But I wanted to read for you basically a summation kind of my origin story and how I got my start in podcasting and in this whole game of podcasting, because it really is, it really has been one hell of a journey for me, and it's not over by any stretch of the imagination. So I want to read this article for you. It's a little memoir piece I wrote back in 2017 for like a conservative college magazine. I wrote it, and then they never ended up publishing it, so I ended up publishing it on my own website, thesamwhitfield.com. And I will be writing on that site a lot more too, by the way. But let me go ahead and read this for you. This is titled My Journey Through the World of Conservative Media as an American with Physical Disabilities. And for those of you watching, you guys can see this on your screen now. Donald Trump's presidential campaign was revolutionary in ushering in a new age of conservatism for America. While he might not be everyone's ideal definition of what a conservative is, quote unquote, Even his biggest critics have had difficulty denying his ability to reach out to groups that the Republican Party has traditionally had a hard time reaching, such as independent voters, LGBT citizens, and African Americans, to name just a few. Those on the left have had an extremely difficult time with trying to comprehend how and why so many quote unquote minority groups could vote for a Republican like Donald Trump. Ironically, it is the left wing separation of quote unquote minorities into different victim groups that has driven more and more of them to adapt conservative and or libertarian principles and vote Republican at an increasing rate. I know this because I myself am a minority due to the fact that although I'm a straight white male, I am in fact physically disabled and require a wheelchair for mobility. Although I have been in the political commentary arena since I was 14 years old, I feel that now is the perfect time to finally tell my full story of how I discovered conservatism and my continuing journey in the political media landscape over the last 9 years. Now, by now, folks, this article is actually, it was written back in 2017, so really I've been in the political arena for 11 years. But anyway, let me continue on here. Growing up in a wheelchair certainly had its disadvantages due to the fact that I couldn't just run around and go like most of my friends. And this increasingly became true just before I entered high school and the infamous party scene began for most of my classmates. Despite the fact that I couldn't always physically participate in normal adolescent activities, I still was able to develop interests and hobbies of my own, with politics becoming one of them at the age of 10 or so during the 2004 election. My parents are both politically knowledgeable, with my father being an independent with liberal leanings on social issues and a more center-right slant on fiscal and foreign policy issues, while my mother is more of a true conservative with a libertarian view on social issues. As a result of their diverse viewpoints, I was constantly exposed to both the ideas of conservatism and liberalism on a daily basis. However, it was ultimately Rush Limbaugh who made the case for the conservative ideology and way of life. I remember sitting back in the back of my mother's car, hearing Limbaugh explain the fundamental differences between the big government agenda of the left and the small government case for being conservatism, and realizing how much it made sense to me. From age 10 on, I would continue to listen to Rush whenever I could, which was mostly during the summers when I didn't have school. I would politely engage my teachers in political discussions while discussing history and civics, and although I discovered that many of them were liberally slanted, they were still very polite. It wasn't until 2008, during the presidential race between then Senator Barack Obama and John McCain, that I realized my political voice needed to be heard. I was 14 and well versed in conservative principles by that time. My impression of Obama was that he was a nice guy who simply lacked political experience and flip-flopped on way too many issues for my liking. I actually really liked him as a person, but his policies or lack thereof just weren't doing anything for me. Yet, when I brought this up to my friends, they called me a racist. I remember being asked, how could you be against the first black president, by some close friends, and being shocked at the accusations of racism. What made it worse was the fact that political correctness, as we now know it today, was starting to emerge and take control of the millennial generation's many innocent and gullible members, turning them into free speech hating, cry baby safe space needing zombies for the far left that you see today. I call them zombies in the nice way possible because so many of them were and still are unaware of the quote unquote right way of thinking. In a sense, I guess one might say I saw this coming a mile away when it first started, so I did something about it. Because of my physical disability, my ability to type has always been difficult at best, and back in 2008, voice to dictation software sucked, so blogging was out. And folks, not to diverse too much from the article, but that was true. Most of the dictation software back then was very expensive, ladies and gentlemen, and in order to use it, I would have to talk like this in a monotone voice with zero inflection. I could only say so many words so many times, and this really became troublesome as my voice started to crack and I was going through puberty. It's a lot better now, of course, ladies and gentlemen. But anyway, back to the article. I just so let me go back to the article. I decided to take a page out of Rush Limbaugh's playbook and started my podcast, which would eventually be named the Whitfield Analysis. For the first 2 years, my podcast really didn't do that well. No one really knew what a podcast even was, and social media was still in its infancy, where no one knew if it would last. Then in 2010, everything changed with the Tea Party revolution, the rise of Andrew Breitbart, and conservatives taking over Twitter. I started finding other teenagers and college students who shared a passion for conservatism. Andrew Breitbart was the second biggest political influence in my life, with the third being radio host and attorney Hugh Hewitt. And yes, folks, I know that Hugh Hewitt won't never Trump. I'll get to that I'll get to that later. The time between 2010 and the end of 2011 was a glorious time to be a young conservative. Unfortunately, 2012 was not kind to us at all. First, with the sudden death of Andrew Breitbart, who was an icon and hero to many millennial conservatives such as myself. And then with the gut-wrenching re-election of Obama, whom by that time had shown his true colors in wanting to tear down the idea of American exceptionalism and replace it with a far-left, borderline socialist system. Or the deep state, as it's now known, folks. Yet through the entirety of Obama's presidency, I never stopped giving up on the fight for conservatism. I've met so many wonderful people who couldn't care less that I'm physically disabled, and more about our common love for America. On the other hand, the social justice warrior left continues to put disabled people into the same victim class as gays, blacks, Latinos, etc. I've realized that many who identify as liberal have good intentions of helping, but there are also many of those who simply exploit these groups and demographics for political power, and even worse, have no problem with beating a disabled person to near death if they're in the wrong race or social class, as demonstrated in Chicago. Remember, folks, that was when that young disabled man was beaten and scalped by a bunch of hoodlums in Chicago simply because they thought he voted for Donald Trump. That wasn't even true. Okay. Now, coming to the close of my essay. My point in writing this long essay-like post is that conservatism and its principles are well worth fighting for, no matter who you are. Although I initially wasn't a supporter of Donald J. Trump during the primaries, it was honestly incredible to see so many people from different walks of life band together to defeat a titled symbol of corruption in America in politics, that being the left, of course, and work to make America great again. And folks, so that's the article again. I wrote that in, 2017, so it's a few years old, but still incredibly relevant there, I think, ladies and gentlemen. Um, definitely relevant. Now, I will say this. Um, obviously, ladies and gentlemen, most of you guys also know that one of my big breaks came from interviewing Ben Shapiro. I've discussed, how that all came about, and I actually reposted that episode fairly recently. I want to say 2 or 3 months ago to the podcast, and I think it's also on the Whitfield Report YouTube channel. I will say that, I'm not like a total fan of the establishment, conservatives or the Never Trump movement. I do understand that, you know, Shapiro's not perfect. There's some stuff I disagree with him on now, but for them, and of course, Hugh Hewitt has become a big Never Trumper now. He's another one of those kind of like old establishment neocon, GOP people. With that being said, I started this at an extremely young age, and I might not be the most, famous and viral podcaster slash, commentator, but I think in a way I've made my own mark in the political sphere, and I've changed and I've, evolved. And that's just something that you do as you grow older and gain more life experience overall. At least that's what, mature people do. Right? So, I've been in politics for a long time, and for the most part I don't have I really don't have any regrets, so to speak, except for, maybe a few, early episodes. And granted, there have been episodes, more recently where I haven't always had the best, show sometimes because screen quality, or audio quality gets messed up, or clips don't load properly, or, whatever. Not everything is perfect, but I think that the one thing that I've done well is I've been able to grow an audience organically so far, and and when I'm on top of my game, I can keep people interested. I think I'm a good interviewer. That's one thing I enjoy immensely, is interviewing people for the show too. And I've had some tremendous guests on as well, especially in this past year with with Sean and Dictator Phil and Alex, the host of Versa Media, and the heads of TPUSA at Penn State. Those are some of my favorite guests. I've had Robbie Robertson on the audio podcast, who's not really a political guy, but just, a fascinating podcast host to talk to. He does a good podcast as well, Out of the Blank. Jimmy, of course, Hajam from Great Britain, who I'm friends with over, at the on the Gavin McGinnis Discord and subreddit over there. He's good, and granted, I haven't had like too many big, big name people on for a while. I'm hoping that will change in 2020, ladies and gentlemen. But the other thing that I've realized too, and this is important, I've talked a little bit about this, but I have also come to realize in the past year, folks, that, while I enjoy politics and whatnot, it's also just podcasting in general that I enjoy. And, in a way, um, that's why I do the show. It's not necessarily because of the politics, although, that is where I get my audience from, but it's also I like discussing movies and pop culture and just conversing with people in general. In fact, the best podcasts that I've had this year are when I've had long form discussions with people about various topics. And like the folks I named above. And listen, I've gotten a lot of comments, like, there are people who don't like, Shapiro or, Milo or Gavin or anyone else, and that's fine. We don't have you don't have to like everyone that I like, and there are people that I disagree with too on the right. We don't all have to necessarily agree with each other 100%, but I do think, as I said, I like to hear from a diverse, group of people from within the liberty movement, and also I mean, up until really the whole, you know, uh, gummy incident took off, I was willing to have a reasonable conversation with, even like Owen Benjamin, and if he were, sane. But and I don't want to get into that whole thing again. But anyway, I just like having conversations with people. That's why I podcast to this day. And I'm hoping that you guys, continue to support the show. And as always, I'm always willing to hear, feedback and what you guys like. And hopefully, I'll be able to take some calls in the coming year, some live callers on the Saturday show. And I don't want to make too many announcements, but I might be adding a co-host here too at some point, because that's the other thing, folks. When I started podcasting, I would do podcasts like this, where I would just be in a room monologuing, um, in front of my microphone, and just watching the waveforms in audio software on my computer. That was literally how, I used to podcast back in the day. And then, it was only like about a year ago, really, less than 2 years ago, even, I moved over to YouTube and started growing this podcast and made a whole thing. So again, folks, like I said, I'm extremely grateful to all of you, and to everyone who has made this podcast tremendous. And I do want to I know that this episode is a little short for the official last episode here, but let's see how we're doing on time. Wow, we're only 25 minutes in. I suppose that I could pull up some clips for you guys. So hold on a sec here, ladies and gentlemen. Let me minimize a few things here. Okay. And pull up something. So I will go. Let me go to YouTube here. Let me search something here. Okay. Let's see. Sorry, folks. You guys are watching me do some behind-the-scenes stuff. Apologies to those of you listening to this on the audio podcast. I know that this is just a bit boring, but anyway. Let's see. I'm trying to find the clip of Breitbart here. Okay, so I want to play this clip of Andrew Breitbart where he explains the Democrat media complex, because this right here, ladies and gentlemen, was really one of the turning points for me politically, where I really understood, how the mainstream media was controlled by the left, and why the new generation and the culture war is really important. Let me go full screen here and switch the switch over to video. Okay. So this is Andrew Breitbart on the Democrat media complex. Clip number 1, go.
You describe, in Righteous Indignation, a privileged upbringing in Southern California. Exclusive schools, very comfortable circumstances. Your parents weren't particularly political, but they were more or less conservative. And then this, I'm quoting from the book. Through some form of osmosis, I considered myself a liberal. How come?
My parents didn't fight for to maintain what it was they were teaching me through their deeds and their acts. They are a very silent generation. I grew up around with friends who had younger baby boomer parents, and they were very forthright in their politics. They would go to their rock concerts. They'd go to their Rock for Kampuchea. They'd fly to Philadelphia for Live Aid. And I remember my mother would watch Lawrence Welk on Saturday nights. The juxtaposition of...
That's not a hard choice. You want where the action was.
It was, and so as much as I loved my parents, the flow towards my friends and their parents' way of life and way of thinking was the most natural thing in the world.
An important moment comes when you know the man who will become your father-in-law, the comedian and actor Orson Bean, known to people of a certain generation from To Tell the Truth, known to people of another generation from Desperate Housewives. And you, well, here, I'll just quote to you from Righteous Indignation. One day I asked Orson why he had Rush Limbaugh's book, The Way Things Ought to Be, on his shelf. I was convinced to the core of my being that Rush Limbaugh was a Nazi, anti-black, anti-Jewish, and anti-all things decent. Orson simply suggested that I listen to him again. And what happened when you did?
Well, it was the 1992 election cycle, and at that point I thought I was a liberal, and I started listening to Rush simply because my alternative radio station had turned into a grunge rock festival. I loathed Kurt Cobain and Eddie Vedder so much that I switched to the AM dial out of desperation. And so that's really, I have to thank grunge music for turning me into a conservative. And I remember the first month or two thinking, well, I may not agree with his politics.
Thanks, Kurt Cobain. Very cool.
But at no point have I heard him intimate anything that appears to be racist, sexist, or homophobic. And I started to ask people around me, have you ever listened to this Rush Limbaugh creature? And they said, yes, he's a racist, sexist, and a homophobe. I said, okay, I need some help here, because I've been listening now for months as I'm driving on LA freeways delivering scripts. He's not. He's not. And what I realized is I believed to the core of my being that I had listened to him. If you had given me a lie detector test, I promise you I would have passed, because with conviction, the culture, the 60 Minutes report on him, all of the things that I had been told reflected that negative stereotype. But I, in fact, had never assessed him myself, and recognizing that the mainstream media doesn't necessarily tell you the truth or tells you the truth from its ideological standpoint became this panacea for me, where I started to challenge the mainstream media.
Again, from Righteous Indignation, Limbaugh, like the professor I always wanted but never had, created a vivid mental picture of the architecture of a world that I resided in but couldn't see completely, the Democrat media complex. Describe the architecture.
Well, it's the Matrix. I mean, it really, for me, it was, if you've ever been to Coney Island and you see those holograms where there's a picture of the Empire State Building and you're supposed to squint, and you squint and you squint, and you can't see it, but eventually you see the Eiffel Tower. And you're like, and then once you see the Eiffel Tower, you can't not see the Eiffel Tower. And through every day, Rush Limbaugh analyzing the source material of the world, the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, ABC, CBS, and NBC, he was able to create for me a very vivid picture that the people who were allegedly objective and neutral reporters and journalists were the front line of the political battle. And they used their objectivity as their greatest weapon, because they were telling young, impressionable people like me who believed in Woodward and Bernstein and who believed in Walter Cronkite, wait a second, you're telling me that perhaps ideology played a role in how they interpreted stories or how they chose one story over the other? And so then the Matrix, or the Democrat media complex, became everything to me. In fact, when discussing politics, I always turn it back to the complex. It's always about seeing the world and hoping that people see the Eiffel Tower.
So this is, you're listening to Limbaugh in 92 during that election cycle, right? And you remain, what I'm...
Okay, so I want to stop the clip here for a sec and go back. Right, I'm on camera right now. I want to break this down a bit because this is honestly a bit fascinating to watch here if I'm being honest, because Breitbart is right. The Democrat media complex and really the mainstream media, um, you know, they've had a stranglehold on on information for the last 30 years, and it really wasn't until you know I mean, Breitbart kind of broke the mold a bit, and I mean Limbaugh certainly did back in the day. But in terms of my era, when I started doing this, it really wasn't until uh, you know, until the 2016 election and the era of Trump that all that we as new media figures, I as a podcaster, and all my uh, contemporaries really began to be taken seriously. And honestly, as I've stated before, I wasn't a big. I didn't hate Trump in the beginning, but like a lot of people, I didn't think he would win because he was so far out there and he was such a genius, troll, that I kind of figured there's no way this guy would, win in a normal election. But as I also wrote back in 2015, to quote Andrew Breitbart here once again, I will vote for whoever the candidate is, because if we don't, we lose to the left and we lose, to Hillary Clinton especially. And I got shit from a lot of fellow, college Republicans and young conservatives, quote unquote, who ended up going never Trump. But I also found, I guess kind of common ground with the new age of, what's called, punk rock, sort of the, the alt conservatives, not necessarily the alt right, but just kind of the, you know, the folks who weren't afraid, to be politically, incorrect and whatnot. And, I kind of helped spearhead that a bit. And, now as a result, like I said, we have people like Versa, the folks over at Versa Media, Sean and Alex, and, those guys, I do shout them out a lot. We have me, we have Jimmy Hodgem, who is hilarious and needs a bunch more people. We have Apex Gamma, who is still new to the political game relatively. Granted, he mostly clips own stuff, but I've had him on here for some political discussions, and he's pretty good too. So there are lots of young conservatives out there who are, doing God's, work in 20, you know, right now and fighting back against the culture war. And then you know, we also have, people like Robbie Robertson who aren't necessarily as political as I am, but they're open to, diverse discussion, and they're sick and tired of the whole politically correct, you know, kind of shit show out there. I think that is one thing that we can all kind of agree on, is that political correctness is becoming a cancer, hugely. So it really is. Um, I mean, another big influencer in the past few years for me personally, Joe Rogan. And I know that a lot of people think that Joe Rogan is a gatekeeper and that he's, a shill or whatever, but I don't think he is, folks. He might not be 100% conservative. He might be, pretty far left on some social issues. I certainly don't always agree with what he says, but I like the fact that he's willing to talk to people who are seen as controversial. I mean, he's had Alex Jones on twice, who is one of the most controversial figures out there, so to speak. Alex Jones himself, I really am starting to like. Even though he's become somewhat of a meme, he embraces it completely and totally. Obviously, Dennis Miller is a huge influence of mine, as I've discussed before. And people have also asked me if I'm still a fan of Nick DiPaolo, and the answer is, yeah, I like Nick. I think that Nick is pretty good. I know that he kind of, got caught in the quagmire of the whole Owen and Nimmer controversy and that whole thing, and whatnot. But Nick's a pretty good guy for the most part. So overall, it's been a pretty damn good decade for me in terms of podcasting in general. Starting the show as the as the Whitfield analysis way back in 2008, growing that. I launched 2 podcast networks, wasn't terribly successful with them. And then kind of started doing my own thing in 2015 and 2016, and started diversifying the podcast, and so far it's been pretty good so far. So anyway, folks, it's I mean, there's not a whole lot I can complain here. I think the future of the podcast is looking bright, and I will be having much more to discuss. And like I said, this is technically the final episode, but I may have one more actual live stream here. So for the purposes of this episode, I'll post this the final episode part 1, and then if I can get a live stream together for New Year's, I will do that. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for tuning in and watching and listening to the podcast wherever you are in the past, present, future hour. From all of us here at NGC Studios, have a happy New Year. God bless and God save this great nation, and I will see you all in 2019, and I'll maybe do a short episode later today on New Year's Eve. Anyway, folks, I want to thank you. God bless and God save this great nation. Thank you for watching and or listening to the Whitfield Report, and have a great day. Hey there, folks. If you've made it this far to the end of the podcast, I'd like to thank you very much for listening to the show. You are the ones that make it possible for me to make an income from podcasting, and I greatly appreciate that just by listening to our show. you are helping us gain ad revenue. However, if you would really like to help support the show, I encourage you to please donate to the podcast and become a supporter of the show. You can head over to anchor.fm/Whitfield Report and click the support this podcast button and choose the amount that suits you to support the show. Or you can click the link in the show notes and it will directly take you to that page. If you can support the podcast, I really, really appreciate that. Anything that you can do to help out is greatly appreciated. Even if you can't afford to help financially support the podcast, I encourage you to please go on iTunes or Apple Podcasts or Stitcher and please leave this podcast a positive 5-star review. That really helps us out here at the Whitfield Report. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next episode.